Mexico's oil industry. Communications project by Chris Mills, Daniel Evans, David Paternostro, and Will Ziegler. The history of oil in Mexico begins with the early natives using it as incense, to repair canoes, and also to build huts. However, the internal market for Mexican petroleum began when railroads started flooding the nation. Before railroads started, there was no way for any element of the oil industry to run smoothly. There were many early contributors to success, one of which was Edward Doheny, who was the first man to start commercial production of oil in Mexico. President Diaz, the man in the right, is a main reason petroleum became a priority for Mexico. Because he saw its true potential, President Diaz encouraged entrepreneurs to develop the industry throughout the country. Wheatman Pearson was one of these businessmen who began an extremely successful oil company and put Mexico on the petroleum-based map. Once Diaz's reign as president was over, however, Pearson had the ability to do whatever he wanted with his oil and his business. Pearson sold to Royal Dutch Shell, which created problems with Mexican government because of Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution that stated that Mexico had all rights to any subsoil resources. Once the 1930s came around, the oil business in Mexico had developed so much to the point that it was considered a golden age. Mexico became first internationally in production and second internationally in exportation behind the USA. The Poza Rica oil field was founded in 1932, which yielded the most oil from Mexico for many, many decades. In 1938, Pemex, the national oil company that became the staple for Mexican oil, was founded as a result of President Lázaro Cárdenas' desire for the expropriation of the foreign oil companies in Mexico. Beginning in the 1970s, Mexico started to fund oil all over the country. Places like Veracruz, Baja California, Chiapas, and Tabasco yielded exceptional oil reserves. Most of these locations are found on the oil-rich Gulf Coast, which can be seen in the upper picture to the right. The Cantarell oil field was founded in 1976, which is the biggest oil field in Mexico and one of the biggest in the world. The enormity of the Cantarell oil field can be seen in the chart to the lower right, which displays the number of hundreds of billions of barrels that the oil field produced daily. Today, Mexico is still a top producer of oil worldwide. Pemex is still the active NOC in Mexico, and it works hard to maintain safety and to make sure that it produces and exports as much oil as they can.
Mexico's exploration and production. According to Mexico's Central Inc., the oil sector generated 11% of the country's export earnings in 2014, a proportion that has declined over the past decade. A little history on Pemex. After the oil companies controlled by mostly Standard Oil in Britain, oil companies at the time refused to compensate the union demands of increased compensation during 1936 to 1937. After this, the Mexican Supreme Court ordered compliance of the foreign-owned oil companies, which caused them to go into outrage and assault the Cardenas administration through the media. Cardenas, in response, expropriated the foreign-owned oil companies and started the state-owned oil company of Pemex. Pemex has had a monopoly over the Mexico's exploration and production of suboil resources since 1936 till about present day. The two graphs shown are portrayals of production and consumption in Mexico. The one on the left shows a decline over the past 5 years in production and consumption, whereas the one on the right shows consumption of petroleum and other liquids and natural gas at 40%, which is on a continuous rise. Mexico's oil production has been on a steady decline since 2005 due to natural production declines from the large offshore fields. This problem could not be fixed due to a split in the government between the two political parties who opposed each other. President Peña Nieto's plan to reconstruct the natural gas and oil industry in order to boost the economic growth led to the end of Mexico's state-owned oil company Pemex in 2013. He did this by a series of reforms that were passed by Mexico's legislation. Mexico's major oil fields. Offshore Cantarell, first major producer of crude oil for Mexico from 1997 to 2004, but has been on a steady decline for the past decade, whereas Comalub-Zaip, Mexico's most prolific oil field, tripled their production from 2004 to 2014 using nitrogen injections from Pemex. Littoral de Tabasco increased from less than 200,000 barrels per day in 2008 to 320,000 barrels per day in 2004, whereas Acapulco declined considerably from peak levels achieved in the mid-1990s when output exceeded 700,000 barrels per day. Production in 2014 only averaged less than 300,000 barrels per day. Onshore production has come from two major oil fields. In the south, Samira Luna produced about 161,000 barrels per day in 2014. In the north, Chicontepec, Pemex's biggest investment for the past few years in order for future production. Production has declined, though, from 2013 to 2014 due to technical challenges and also lack of financial funds.
Mexico's oil exports, imports, and consumptions. Mexican oil exports to the United States increased from 1980 to 2004, where the volume of exports reached a high of 1.6 million barrels per day. Since 2006, Mexican oil exports have gradually decreased due to the decrease in production of crude oil, increase in demand, and increase of oil production in the United States. In the past 10 years, the United States exports of gasoline to Mexico have doubled, now at 200,000 barrels per day, due to the lack of crude oil refineries in Mexico. Due to the United States Department of Commerce making an exception to their ban on the exportation of crude oil in August 2015, oil imports from the United States could possibly double in Mexico in the next 5 years through the use of pipelines in Texas. The lighter crude oils, such as Isthmus and Olmeca, produced offshore are saved for domestic consumption within Mexico. The demand of crude oil imports in Mexico has increased in the past decade due to a decrease in production and a constant rate of consumption. In 2014, Mexico consumed 1.966 million barrels per day of refined petroleum products, placing them at 12th in the world for refined petroleum product consumption.
Quantities and types of oil resources. Shale gas resources are mostly found in the northeast and central east regions of the country. Mexico is also home. Shale gas resources are mostly found in the northeast and central east regions of the country. Mexico is also home of one of the largest shale gas resource bases. This base could easily support an increase in production rates of natural gas. There is a recent study that found Mexico to have 545 trillion cubic feet of recoverable shale gas. This makes it the sixth largest country in terms of how much shale gas could be recoverable that has had this study. The consumption of natural gas is supposed to increase by 64% until 2027. Natural gas is in high demand right now. The one thing Mexico needs to improve on is the amount of natural gas they are producing. In 2000, they imported 30% of the United States natural gas exports. That 30% was all of Mexico's natural gas. 14 years later, Mexico finally had some infrastructure for natural gas. Mexico is also home of one of the largest shale gas resource bases. This base could easily support an increase in production rates of natural gas.